Hello, thank you so much for clicking on our link. You are listening to our video series on peer support and all issues of mental health. My name is Chrissie.
And my name is Jody.
No bloopers today. And we are peer support specialists, and we like to say that we're doing peer support Southern style.
That's right.
Even though we live in Denver. We're both from Georgia. Today we wanted to talk about recovery, and you're going to get a take from both myself and Jody on what recovery means and what it means to us. And so I'll just quickly say recovery, when we're talking about mental illness, means that someone is living with a mental illness successfully. That's how I look at it, and I'll tell my own personal view on that in just a second. And I think that you could probably compare it to what people say when they're in recovery from addiction. I think it's pretty similar, but we'll give you some specifics today as you listen to this video. What do you think?
Okay, recovery. Recovery to me is changing your story. It's about going from an illness story to a wellness story.
Yes.
And, you know, all the things involved in it are like things like self-care. That's huge. One is laughter, as you saw in our blooper. You know, it's... you know, recovery is, it's a real thing. You know, a lot of people out there don't believe that you can recover from a mental health challenge, but I'm here to tell you different. So
now, being in recovery does not mean that you are free from symptoms forever. So that is kind of a misconception, and I didn't really understand that either about addiction. It just means that you've gotten to a place in your life where you manage it successfully. And the way that I look at recovery, and when I felt like I was finally in recovery, it took me, at least 12 years after my diagnosis to say that I live in recovery. And I had to go through the specific stages, and I tried to remember this yesterday when we recorded, and now I don't remember it again. But I think it's the 5 stages of grief. Is that right? Mm-hmm. So when I was diagnosed with a mental illness, and I see this in a lot of people, and it's the core of personal stigma. You have to go through a lot of emotions when you're first diagnosed in order to get to recovery. And that's perfectly acceptable. You're going to go through sadness. You're going to go through anger, and a lot of anger. And you should, because it sucks having a mental illness, and it pisses people off. You're going to go through denial. You're going to go through bargaining. And then finally you get to acceptance, and it's hard to get to that acceptance recovery place until you've worked through every single stage. And we're going to go through the actual 5 stages of mental illness that I think kind of correlate with what I was just talking about. Why don't you start us off with the 5 stages? Jody's the expert in the 5 stages, and we'll just tell how we both felt during those stages.
Okay. Yeah. You know, I'll go through it with my own experiences. You know, prior to being diagnosed, you know, I've divided my life up into pre-diagnosis and post-diagnosis. Pre-diagnosis, I lived a very successful life. I was a wrestler. I was a triathlete. I was an all-star baseball player in Little League. You know, my story was one of well-being and success. Cut to the day I was diagnosed. I basically was told that I was going to be sick and medicated for the rest of my life. You know, I didn't identify it at the time as trauma, but that's what my experience was. You know, you can split the brain up into 2 parts. There's the left side, and the right side. The left side puts words to things. The right side is more about emotions.
That's where I live all the time.
I'm a right brain person. And, you know, so, you know, I finally, in preparation for one of my trauma-informed peer support classes, realized and put words to that I would experience trauma. And so, you know, I've learned a lot about how to move on from that. So that's my first stage.
So what's the actual stage?
The first stage is the shattering of your world, hopes, and dreams.
And so that's what you experienced when that happened, which is it's pretty similar to mine. The day that I found out that I was mentally ill, I cursed. And I thought, there I go. Everything that I've ever built up to this point, that person that I thought I was, all that's gone. That doesn't mean a thing. Life is over. And now I will only be identified as someone, and I was diagnosed in the psych ward, so I will only be identified as someone with a mental illness in a psych ward. So my whole life was shattered.
And then the second stage is the life is limited phase. And that was when I started to define myself in terms of my mental illness. I was, life for me had a future of groups, therapy, psychiatrist appointments, and medication, side effects that were horrific. During this phase, what I did is I crawled into bed and put the covers over my head, and had no hope of a successful future. It was pretty dim.
And I mean, I would say majority of people with mental illness go through each one of these phases, wouldn't you, Jody?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I had a similar experience as Jody. I started identifying with the illness. Unfortunately, mine played out for many, many years after that. It wasn't a short phase for me. And that was that everything in my life that was bad or anything that happened, I attributed negatively because I had a mental illness. So my life, like the lens of my life I was looking through was, you're mentally ill, so you're doomed. And relationships are going to fail. Nobody's going to hire you. No one's going to love you. And everything that goes wrong in your life is a result of this mental illness. And I spent many, many, many years, very unpleasant years in that stage.
And then the next stage for me was the fragile flame of hope and courage. That day came when my therapists recommended that I go to a respite center in Georgia. And basically, I had decided that, no longer can I do athletic things. These medications are weighing me down. It's time to shift gears and find a new hobby. So I decided that would be creative writing. And it was so great. I walked through the doors of that respite center, and there was a big poster that said creative writing class. And so, in my mind, I was like, I'll go one time. I'll go to this creative writing class. I'll be able to go to my next therapist appointment and say I went. But that didn't happen. I took that creative writing class, and I met some wonderful people. People, I was deep in the closet with my mental illness. I didn't want anyone to know. And I feel like I'm a very open person about who I am and always have been. And to have to hide I'll say it's the smallest part of who I am. But I'm not in denial that I do have a mental health challenge. I had to hide that about myself. So, my thing is authenticity and being, authentically you. And to have one small section of my being to have shame about it didn't sit well with me. But all of a sudden I was exposed to people that were not ashamed of their mental health challenge. And the most important thing, they were succeeding in their lives.
Yep.
And that meant the world to me. I was like, maybe, just maybe, if these people can do it, I can do it. Shame
can't live in the light. Brene Brown. Seriously, I think that's the quote.
She's the quote girl.
No, I am not. He is. I just misquote. I absolutely, that was the same, and many people experience the same thing when they have mental illness. They spend years and years in the mentally ill closet because they're so ashamed. They don't want anyone to know. They think if people find out, they're going to reject them, which heck, some people might, and some people might find out and they can't handle it. But I mean, my policy on that is bye. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, there are plenty of us out there.
Got to go.
There are plenty of us out there that have mental illness. You got friends out here. We're your friends.
That's right.
The small flame of hope for me was when I just got sick of being angry. I got sick of hiding and feeling shame and not feeling like I could be who I was. And I was buried underneath all of these feelings. And I decided, I had this idea one day, I'm going to start to learn to public speak. I'm going to start talking about my illness. And all of a sudden, I went to Toastmasters, and the first time I did a speech about my illness, I bawled the whole time through, and they couldn't really judge me because it was Toastmasters, and they were just judging my speech. But it was freeing. That was the flame of hope for me. It gave me hope that I could actually be somebody that had a voice with mental illness, but also it gave me hope that I could reach people out there that had been suffering for so long.
So Well, the next stage is the commitment to change.
Oh, right. Okay.
That's our fourth stage. The commitment to change for me was, I had a dear friend of mine in Georgia that we would take these walks together. And I like to think that she kind of nursed me back to health. And one day she was like, "You'd be a great counselor. You're a good listener." And, I thought that was great, but thought nothing about it. And then I went to the respite center again and started to learn about peer support. And I learned that your lived experience is your biggest qualification.
Yes.
And that just blew me away. I was like, "You mean I have to have a mental health challenge to be a peer support specialist?"
The sicker you are, the more they want you.
And so, I thought maybe I can do this. Maybe I'll be, maybe I can have the potential to succeed in this. I had a past career in peer support or IT support, and nothing against IT, but for me it was just a soul sucking job. And this peer support has helped me to blossom as a person. So just those thoughts of I'm gonna commit myself to being a peer specialist.
The commitment to change. Mine was, I had owned a clothing store at the time, and when I found that little seed of that passion and I knew that's where I was going to go, I was terrified, trust me. I closed down my shop and just committed. I committed to advocacy. I didn't know where it was going to take me. I didn't know what was going to happen, if everybody was going to disown me or what. But that was my commitment, and I decided that I would lead a life of example of someone with a mental illness. Now, that isn't always a great example. I'm not saying it is, but at least it's reaching out and touching people that feel alone and have been in the closet of mental illness for so long.
Yeah. And then finally, there is the actions for change. And that was where, I built up enough confidence in myself to apply for the job. And that was my first action for change. And, the universe had plans for me because there was a job opening at that respite center and another one that I worked at first in the same network. And, I've never looked back. It's just, I cannot tell you all the wonderful, amazing people that I've met, that I've made connections with, that have, they say you get what you give. And I feel like I do give. But gosh, what I've got in return, working with this one, it means a lot to me. It means the world. So
action for change for me it was just an extension of the commitment. Once I made the commitment, the actions just followed, whether I wanted to or not. It was scary, and it's always been scary. But just like Jody said, when you put that stuff out, all of a sudden doors start opening. And it's amazing what's transpired in this advocacy sense, and the people that I've touched and the people that have touched me. Good Lord, I've changed immensely just by coming in contact with people I never knew were struggling, and all of a sudden we can help support each other. So that was my action for change. So those are the 5 stages that almost everyone goes through when they have a mental illness, and it's something that's not very well known, and you can be in those stages and feel very alone. Our final point that we wanted to make was, can anybody achieve recovery? The point that I definitely want you to walk away with is that yes, recovery is possible for everyone. I do not care what the circumstances are. I mean, it is possible for everyone, but you have to want it. You have to work at it. You have to live it, and also know that it's fluid. And you can go in and out of these stages. Some days I wake up really angry and sad about, and especially if I'm symptomatic, I feel sadness about it. But that doesn't mean that I'm not still in recovery and just experience these powerhouse emotions that go along with having a mental illness. It's not easy, but please know that whatever you're going through, recovery is possible.
Yeah. I'm going to paraphrase this quote, but once, and I'm not sure who said it, but it goes something like this. Once the mind is expanded, it can't contract back to its original size.
Thank goodness.
And, my thing is if you can just get to that next stage for a little while, I've been through the 5 stages. And now when I get symptomatic or things start going downhill, I think back and I remind myself that I've been to this stage, the actions for change stage, and I can get there again. Knowing, and here lately, what I've been pondering is, don't shortchange your experiences.
Right.
Whenever when I start down the road of thinking that I'm going to go back to where I was, I think, I've come through all that, and man, what strength there is in knowing that you can overcome, those dark stages, and you're going to come out through the other side. So
you're looking at two people who have hit absolute rock bottom with a mental illness, absolute, several times over, who've come back from suicide attempts, run the gamut. And we've gone through all of the stages and continue to experience them, but we keep rising higher above that, knowing that recovery is work. But once you get here, you'll look back and go, it was all worth it. It was all worth it.
So, if you don't have a peer support specialist in your life, find one.
Yes.
It's life-changing. And hopefully, if you don't have one in your area, you'll continue to watch these YouTube videos, because we're just getting started, folks.
Yep. And if you need some help finding someone or need some direction on where to look, please contact us. It's Jody and Chrissie, JodyandChrissie @gmail.com. And we'll be happy to help you look in your area to find someone or just to find some support in general. I think that probably wraps it up for today, right, Jody?
That's it.
But thank you for listening. Don't forget, recovery is possible for every single person. You are not the exception.
Recover, y'all.
Recover, y'all. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.